In this orthokeratology case, the patient's worn lenses for about a week but is not getting full correction. If we look at the pre and post wear maps, I ran a difference map and the patient's got about 2 diopters of flattening between these two. And the initial refraction was about a plano minus 2.5 against the rule. And I would expect the post-wear refraction to probably be around plus 150, minus 250 against the rule still. But the patient's actually soaking up some of that minus, spherically at least. So that's a good note to keep in mind as we go forward with the case. I'm going to bring up lenses. Let's start with the right eye. So here's the patient's lens for the right eye. So a couple of things that I think are good to point out. One is, so here's the refraction, about 2.5 diopters against the rule cylinder in the refraction. If we look at the topography, the patient's got about a diopter and a quarter on the cornea. And so what that means is if we were successful in molding out 100% of the corneal cylinder, the patient's refraction is still going to show about a diopter and a quarter against the rule. So in this case, what we actually have to do is not sphericalize the cornea, but we need to turn this against the rule cornea into a diopter and a quarter with the rule cornea. And that is not going to be easy. Against the rule cylinder is difficult to mold out in the first place, and to mold it out into the opposite direction is not going to be an easy task. So hopefully this is a motivated patient because there's a really good chance we're not going to end up at plano. But if the patient is motivated and expectations are good, I think you can still get a happy patient even if refractively we're not at a great endpoint. Looking at this lens, it's an 11.5 diameter, and when I measured the HVID for the right eye, I got about 11.4. So we're actually a little bit larger than HVID, and corneo-scleral, if that's the desired route, is fine. But I think where we are right now, we have the edge of the lens landing right at the limbus. So if we want to go corneo-scleral, then I think we need to go larger than this, probably by a couple millimeters. If we're gonna do just a corneal lens, then we need to reduce this, and I would drop it down to an 11.2, about 0.2 millimeters less than HVID. The way it is right now, I think the edge of the lens is landing right at the limbus, and we probably don't want to press on the limbus too much with the lens. We're in RSIM, and because we need to do a lot of toric adjustment, I recommend going to either GSIM or maybe even a freeform on this patient. Just looking around here. Maybe a GSIM would work. We can try that first and see how it looks. And then I would also turn the blending back on. So we have it turned off right now, which sometimes gives us a sharper return zone, but if we're going to go smaller in the diameter, I recommend turning the blending back on or unchecking this box so that we maintain good centration. So to change from RSIM to a different design, it's unfortunately not as simple as just clicking the next box. We actually need to go into the tools and configuration settings, and we'll do a standard ortho K. So our overall diameter will change to about 11.2. Optic zone, let's do a traditional 6268. You have your edge thickness at 30, a little bit higher, but that's fine. I think most people have their own preference, and I don't see any significant problem with doing that. Our target lens power is going to be really low, and that's because there is very little spherical component to the refraction. Let's try a GSIM lens, and I'm going to pause the video. We're going to turn the blending back on and continue. So here's our GSIM lens in freeform mode. If we switch this to GSIM mode, it looks like the lens aligns really well. But if we leave the display in freeform showing the true cornea, we can see even a GSIM lens is not aligning very well. We're getting quite a bit of clearance here, and since we're trying to mold kind of an unusual prescription, I think this is a case where we should go to a freeform lens. So back to where we were before. It does retain the settings we had just put in. So in this case, all we need to do is check the next box. And again, this is a preference thing, but I like to add prism to all my freeform lenses. What that does is allows me to ask the lab to dot the lens at the prism, and that way I can see how the lens sits on the eye and whether it's rotating or not. So again, this is optional. I like to have it checked. To continue, and I'll pause the video again while the software runs. So here's our foundational freeform lens. WIG doesn't even think it's an ortho-K lens because we have very, very low demand, but we will be changing that. So since we're working with it against the rule cornea, what we want to do is decrease the OZ and IC width in the horizontal meridian and also increase the power in that meridian. So in 50% mode, I'm going to change this from 6.2 and 6.8 to 5.6 and 6.2. Our initial power was 0.5, and I'm going to make this power about a differential of 3.5, so we want a +4 in this meridian here. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Okay. So now WAVE thinks we're in an ortho-K lens because we have a higher ortho-K demand here in the vertical meridian. Because this is a freeform lens, we have to flip over to the opposite side and do the same thing. I'll pause the video to save some time. So I've gone ahead and mirrored the changes to this side of the lens, reduced the OZ and IC to 5.6 and 6.2, and increased the power or the demand up to +4. So what we have now is a lens with a very toric base curve. It's about a +4 horizontally and +50 vertically. I think it's a good idea to next go into all the oblique meridians in 25% mode. So if we're 50 here and 4 here, that's a differential of 350. Half of that is 175. So here in the obliques, we should be at about 2.25. And so we can just touch these up a little bit. Okay, I think we're done setting our demand. We've got 4 going horizontally, half going vertically, and about 2.25 in all the obliques. The last thing we'll do with this lens is try to destabilize it in the vertical meridian. A lot of times I see cases where patients get induced with the rule astigmatism, and that's because the lens is kind of loose vertically. And most of the time we don't want that, but in this case we do. So let's go ahead and make some changes that will hopefully encourage the lens to rock a little bit across a horizontal fulcrum. So in 50% mode, I'm going to come up and lift the periphery and do the same thing inferiorly. So what we've kind of done is destabilize the lens, lifting the peripheral lens away from the cornea both at the top and at the bottom, and that should hopefully induce even a little bit more astigmatism with the rule into this cornea, which is what we want. So ideally, if this works out, what we'll see is not a circular post-square pattern, but it'll look like a pair of parentheses where we've got red ring to the left and the right, and almost no molding superiorly or inferiorly because patients only got quarter diopter refractive error there anyway. Maybe one other thing I do is go to the front of the lens and reduce this, and that'll reduce some of the bulk of the lens. You'll notice that down here we've got a pretty hefty lens, so maybe we'll go ahead and reduce this a little bit and see if we can thin this lens out. That's about as thin as we can get. So it is kind of a thicker lens, but that's because of the prism from our freeform. In the left eye, I would make the same adjustments. I measure the left eye to be even smaller at about 11.2, so I go maybe with an 11.0 overall diameter in the left eye. We're going to do a toric again with a horizontal, shorter in terms of OZ and IC placement, but taller in terms of graph or topodyman. There was the same amount of cylinder in that eye, about 2.5 diopters, so I'd aim for a differential that mirrors what we did for the right eye. Again, this is not going to be an easy case. This is a very unusual lens, but if it's a motivated patient with the right expectations, your patient hopefully will be pleasantly surprised and pleased with the post-square refraction. So hopefully this helps. Best of luck with your patient, and thanks for watching.